another argument from Etienne Gilson's Handbook for Beginning Realists, which is found in his longer book called Methodological Realism. So, again, this is part of my first chapter of my book called The Heresy of Heresies. Came out a few years ago. It's a defense of Christian common sense realism. Okay, so this is we're going to talk about Gilson's third step in your or everyone's road to realism. Okay, so let me reiterate the first two steps. The first step is you've always been a realist. Secondly, you have to recognize that however hard you try to think differently, you can never manage to think differently than as a realist, because reality is not dependent on your feelings. And then step three, this is the third argument here, that those who claim to think differently think as realists as soon as they forget to act apart. Okay, so now this is kind of like, well, I haven't made a video on this yet, but maybe I will soon. This is kind of one of the critiques of relativism, is relativism is unlivable, right? So maybe we'll talk about that. I'll just stick with Gilson's argument here. But early in the semester, when I teach an Introduction to Philosophy course, I have quite a few students who are vocal advocates of some form of non-realism about reality. Usually it's aesthetic or moral or religious. Those are the two kind of pretty common areas of non-realism or anti-realism or relativism in class. My students often default to anti-realism about big philosophical questions like what is right or wrong, or how do we live our lives, or what is beauty. Yet when it comes to small questions like should I complain about being shortchanged, not giving back enough change when you go to buy something, when it comes to small questions like, is it fair that I don't get paid for the hours that I worked in a given week or month? They claim that there are right answers to these philosophical questions. And then suddenly become very clear-cut common sense realists. So most people are very much realists about their money. Funny how that works. I often present my students with the following scenario. Imagine if you went to Starbucks and paid for a $5 drink with a $20 bill. And the barista behind the counter only gave you $5 back in change and said, thanks for coming into Starbucks. Have a nice day. Next, please. You'd probably say, excuse me, I paid with a 20 for a $5 drink, and where's my other 10 bucks? And suppose the person who took your money said, oh, excuse me, but that's your reality. Next, please. Would you just say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that I was being so closed-minded and judgmental? You just keep the change. No. You'd say something like, hey, you owe me $10. Can I talk to your manager? And suppose the manager then comes out and says, how can I help you? And you explain you paid for a $5 drink with a $20 bill and only got $5 back, and you want your other $10. Suppose the manager says, yeah, well, that's what's real for you. That's your reality. Would you back down thinking, oh yeah, it's just real for me because of how I feel, but it's not real for them? No. You'd say, well, what are you talking about? And suppose the manager then said, look. On your side of the counter, you have your own reality, and on our side of the counter, we have your own reality, and we'd appreciate if you didn't try to push your reality onto us. Would you be happy with that? No, you wouldn't. Because there's a common sense right answer to whether or not correct change has been really given to us. That's Gilson's point. Unless one is playing a part, right? Sitting in some class at a university somewhere where relativism is the thing. Unless you're playing a part, not dealing with what is, then one must live as a realist. No one can live consistently as a relativistic anti-realist. The attempt leads to absurdity. To reiterate, the first three paths are, so let's go back over these real quick as we wrap up this video. Immediately after this the three steps are: you've always been a realist, you can't think reasonably as an anti-realist, you can't live consistently as an anti-realist. Immediately after this third step, Gilson concludes with his opening paragraph with this claim. If one then asks oneself why, one's conversion to realism is all but complete. The idea here seems to be that once we start asking ourselves, why have we always been realists, and why we can't think and live as anti-realists, then we are well on our way to understanding both the reasonableness of and the need for a common sense realist approach to philosophical thinking and to living our lives well. So in conclusion, with this part of Gilson's arguments, Gilson is careful to distinguish between mere common sense from philosophy. Okay, so there's a difference between just common sense and philosophy, philosophical common sense. Here's what he states. It doesn't follow from realism being a philosophy of common sense that common sense is a philosophy, but all sound philosophy presupposes common sense and trusts it. Granted, of course, that whenever necessary, an appeal will be made from ill-informed to better-informed common sense. End quote. Again, that's from Gilson's Methodological Realism, page 93, if you want to look that up. Gilson is right to recognize that common sense alone is not a philosophy, and I totally agree with him on that. Common sense is simply that ability, whether potential or actual, to know what is. And according to Gilson, all good philosophy will begin with common sense. Good philosophy beginning with common sense will apply to all areas of philosophy, whether it's ontology, the nature of reality, epistemology, the nature of knowledge and truth, axiology, whether it's ethical or aesthetic, those areas of the study of value. However, common sense philosophy can be improved. Some common sense can be ill-informed, but it can become better informed. I think this is analogous to C.S. Lewis's idea in his Abolition of Man. In that book, Lewis contrasts two different approaches to the very common sense realist doctrine of objective value. The idea is that values are real, that he defends throughout his lectures. He says, quote, "It's the difference between a man who says you like your vegetables moderately fresh, why not grow your own and have them perfectly fresh, and a man who says throw away the loaf and try eating bricks and centipede instead," end quote. That's from the Abolition of Man, second chapter. It's easy to imagine a debate about something like healthy eating, right? There are several ways to debate about a healthy diet, how you can have a healthy diet. It can be had between two realists, and between a realist and a non-realist, or perhaps between two anti-realists. The intramural realist debate would accept the common sense idea that there's a right way to eat healthy, and a healthy eating isn't dependent on how we feel about it. Further, both common sense realists might agree that to eat healthily in one's diet, one should consume a significant proportion of vegetables. However, the realists now differ as how to best do that. One realist might say you should eat fresh vegetables, the other say you should eat canned or frozen, those are fine. Further, realists might say it's better to eat fresh organic vegetables grown in your own garden without pesticides. Now, this debate moves from ill-informed to better-informed healthy eating habits, or the quality of food, right? It's common sense to recognize that healthy eating is a good thing, albeit ill-informed if that is as far as one gets. Better informed common sense philosophy of eating to recognize that one should consume a healthy proportion of vegetables in one's diet. It's even better informed common sense philosophy of eating that one should eat really nutritious vegetables, whether fresh, frozen, or from your own garden. So the debate about healthy eating would be very different if it were between a realist and a non-realist, or between two non-realists. For in either case, the non-realist would claim that healthy eating isn't even real. There's no such thing. Or it's just relative to how you feel. At least not real, independent from how the eater feels. So it would seem to follow that a steady diet consisting of Twinkies and Mountain Dew is as healthy as a diet of proper nutrition of carbs and protein. But this is absurd. Healthy eating can be no more determined by the contingent features of our desires or will or feelings any more than my feelings alone can determine the amount of gas in the tank of my car. Gilson explains that scientific inquiry that is so useful in the modern world is part and parcel of the kind of common sense realism that will be defended in the rest of the book. Here's what he says. This is again from Gilson's Methodological Realism. This is how science goes. This is how science goes about things. Science is not a critique of common sense, but of the successive approximation to reality made by common sense. The history of science and philosophy witness to the fact that common sense thanks to the methodological use it makes of its resources, is quite capable of invention. We should therefore ask it to keep criticizing its conclusions, which means asking it to remain itself and not renounce itself. Right? I mean, sorry, I'll just pause here for a second. Short little rant here. You know, a few years ago we had quite a few people saying things like, "Follow the science, follow the science." And I think there's something right to that. We should follow science. But is science always settled? I mean, imagine if during the time of the dominance of Ptolemaic astronomy, before the rise of Copernican astronomy, people said, follow the science, right? We would have never left Ptolemaic astronomy and become Copernicans. Follow the science, right? Now, the idea here of follow the science is you don't have to follow what science always says at a given moment. You have to follow the truth. And science is, as Gilson gets it, has common sense as its basis, and it has a methodological use of its resources, and is capable of invention. That's why we have advancement in science. And we should ask it to keep criticizing its conclusions, to get better and better, because we're getting at more and more of what's real. Okay, on to the last paragraph here. This is back to me. The previous quote was from Gilson's Methodological Realism. Common sense realism about the nature of what exists and existence itself is not a static, passive, stultified, one and done approach to reality. It's capable of invention. It's capable of never-ending grasping of the limitless nature of what is. It is a philosophy of hope and optimism, a philosophy in which boredom is anathema. It is the philosophy that goes further up and further in. We were made for all that is, and given the immortality of our souls, we can never exhaust the gift of what is. That ends this discussion of Gilson's argument for realism in my book, The Heresy of Heresies, Defense of Christian Common Sense Realism. In the next video, we're going to look at another argument by James Shaw. It's very short, and we'll continue our discussion. Thanks for watching.
Stay psyched, Grom. You!